Okay, so imagine a world where one single empire is the center of everything, the center of gravity. But even the most powerful forces cast shadows, right? And it's in those shadows that a totally different kind of power can start to grow.
Let's set the scene. We're at the turn of the 19th century. In that center of gravity, it was the Chinese Empire, what they called the Middle Kingdom. And look, this wasn't just another country. It was this massive civilizational force of nature. So huge, it basically bent the rest of the world around it.
And to give you a sense of the sheer scale we're talking about, get this, the empire governed 1/3 of every single human being on the planet. I mean, by any measure you can think of, it was the largest and wealthiest state on Earth, period.
And you got to understand, this wasn't some new kid on the block. This was an ancient, highly sophisticated machine of civilization. I mean, while European powers were still figuring things out with swords, China had already given the world gunpowder, paper money, the compass, you name it. As far as they were concerned, they were civilization. Everyone else, just barbarians playing catch-up.
But here's the thing, even the most powerful gravitational fields have blind spots. Astronomers have a name for this. They call them local holes. These little pockets where the light from the center just doesn't reach. Well, for the Qing Dynasty, its local hole was the sea, and something really dangerous was festering out there on its southern coast.
Because see, if you were living down there, the emperor up in Beijing might as well have been on the moon. Your reality wasn't the glorious ordered empire. No, it was terror. Your coast was being stalked by a pirate confederation that was so powerful, so organized, it was threatening to just eat the empire from the outside in.
And this is where the story gets really dark. We're going to zoom in to one specific moment in 1809 in a small fishing village called Sanshan. This is where that imperial blind spot became a scene of just absolute horror.
This was the promise a pirate captain made to his crew. See, the villagers of Sanshan had made a huge mistake, a fatal one. They'd refused to pay the Confederation's protection money, and now the pirates were here to collect a very different kind of payment.
For 3 straight days, the village was just consumed by horror. Day 1, the pirate fleet swarms the coast, but the villagers, they actually arm themselves and they fight back. But their defense completely collapses on the 2nd day. Their only cannon explodes, their leader gets cut down. And the 3rd day, well, the 3rd day was just a slaughter.
You know, in the middle of all this, in the final moments, there's this one image that just sticks with you. A single villager climbs up onto a rooftop. He's got no weapons left, so he just starts hurling handfuls of dust at the pirates below, over and over, until their spears finally brought him down. It was this last, totally futile act of defiance.
By the time the pirates were done, 2,000 people were dead. An entire community just wiped off the map.
And they left a message. Oh yeah, when they finally sailed away, they left 80 severed heads hanging from the branches of a banyan tree, just staring blankly out at the sea. It was a warning to anyone else who might even think about defying them.
So, the big question is, how? How does this even happen? How does the most powerful empire in the world let a scene of such unbelievable horror unfold right on its own shores? Well, the answer comes down to a fundamental mismatch of systems. See, the Qing Dynasty, the rulers at the time, they were actually outsiders. They were Manchu warriors who had conquered China, but they kept its super sophisticated imperial operating system running. But here's the problem. That system was built for a huge, stable land empire. It was completely, utterly unprepared for the chaos of the sea. You can think of it like this. The two sides were running on completely different operating systems. The Qing Empire was centralized, it was slow, a really rigid structure perfect for controlling land. But the pirates, they were decentralized, they were fast, a fluid network built for the sea. The Imperial Navy trying to catch them was like trying to catch water with a fishing net. It just wasn't going to work.
And we're not talking about some small gang of thugs here. This pirate confederation was basically a floating society. It was a self-sufficient city on the waves. In fact, one historian even called it a bio-industrial megalopolis, which is a fancy way of saying it was a living, breathing, industrial-strength power that the empire's rigid system couldn't even process, let alone fight.
So this whole conflict, this rigid, centralized power, getting totally outmaneuvered by a fluid, chaotic network, it isn't just a story about pirates. When we zoom all the way out, we see this as a timeless struggle. It's the story of established order coming up against the unruly forces that always pop up in the blind spots.
To really get this pattern, you kind of have to think in deep time. Our species, modern humans, we've been around for about 200,000 years. It's an almost impossible stretch of time to wrap your head around.
That's roughly 10,000 generations of human memory and experience, all stacked on top of each other. And in that vast timeline, empires like the Qing Dynasty, they're just a flash in the pan. They rise, they seem permanent, and then they face something they just weren't built for.
Our modern world sits at the very, very tip of that long, long timeline. We've built our own incredibly complex systems of order, and we believe they're stable. But that huge, unpredictable future is always out there, right in front of us. And what history shows us, time and time again, is that the biggest threats, they usually come from where we least expect them. And today, we are absolutely facing our own unruly forces. I mean, just think about the flood of AI-generated content, right? It threatens to totally overwhelm our information systems. It's this decentralized, chaotic force that our centralized platforms are really struggling to contain. Or think about all the disruptive technologies and social movements that just seem to rise up from the fringes, like the pirates. They all grow out of the blind spots of our established order.
So, the story of the Pirate Queen is a really powerful lesson, isn't it? It shows that even the greatest empires can crumble when they're faced with a challenge their system just wasn't designed for. And against that constant tide of chaos, our best defense has always been our own creativity, our ability to adapt, and our integrity. The very things our rigid system can so easily crush.
Which leaves us with one last question to chew on. We've built our own version of the Middle Kingdom, this global technological civilization. But what unruly forces, what cosmic monsters are growing right now in our own local holes?